Good morning.
Hi there. We're just waiting on everyone to join. So we're at 23 participants now, so we'll just wait another minute or so.
Okay.
And actually, while we're waiting, one thing that I will ask is your name on Zoom. If you could make sure that it reflects your actual name, that would be really helpful as we're taking attendance. So if it doesn't say your actual name on Zoom, if you could update it now, that would be really helpful.
And Alexa, I think we're good. There's nobody else in the waiting room now.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you everybody for joining today. Hopefully you enjoyed last week's session. And before we kick off this week's, just want to remind everyone to go ahead and submit your resume assignment from last week. That's due today. If for some reason you cannot submit by today, please reach out to me and let me know and we can work something out. Also, before I pass it over to Rob, just want to remind everyone that you will have a deliverable that's due a week from today. And that is to write a professional email example. And so we'll send more details in an email to you all after this, but just wanted to put that reminder out there. So Rob, I'll go ahead and pass it to you. Feel free to introduce yourself, and thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And allow me to welcome you, and thanks for having me today at the Georgia Bio Emerging Leaders Network Mentoring Program session. I'm Rob Pearson. I work in the Office of Professional Development and Career Planning and the Laney Graduate School at Emory University, where I oversee professional development and career planning opportunities for graduate students in all of our fields at Emory, including in the biomedical sciences and lots of other areas as well. I'm here now today to speak with you for less than an hour about professional communication. I've been asked to speak to you in a kind of interactive way for about 40 to 45 minutes, and then to allow plenty of time for you to have a question and answer session. So I would ask, before we get started, that we spend just a moment establishing some rules of engagement, so to speak. So if you wouldn't mind, double check to make sure that you are unmuted at the moment. And then since we do have a sort of large group, I mean, we could have a very interactive oral session, but I actually think for a group of this size, it might make most sense if we all get really familiar with using the chat function in Zoom. So I think at this point, many of you probably are familiar with how to get to that. If you can, in the chat box, let me know, okay, I'm gonna ask you your first assignment. Give us a very brief introduction to we'll see your name, but also what is the area that you're in. So if that could be your program, your department, your research area, and also end with a little number between 1 to 5 that corresponds with your energy level today. So a 1 would mean you are barely opening your eyes and you slept in, and a 5 would mean like you just got done jogging. I'll give you mine. Wow, I love that someone is a 6 out of 5 in energy. That's great. Energy is 3.5. So we've got folks already joining from a lot of areas. STEM, workforce education. Kristen, you and I should definitely connect because we work in the same area. We have physiology, biology, neuroscience. Oh yeah, neuroscience at Emory. Hi, Kamir, nice to see you. Okay, we've got accelerator program for small businesses, GSU Masters of Biology, Morehouse School of Medicine, BSBT program, 8 out of 10. Okay, some of us are answering out of 10, out of 5, it's fine. I'll just assume if you're above 5, maybe you're answering on the scale of 1 to 10. Biomedical engineering and industry, imaging, Oh, I get it. No, that's great. So neuroscience, Morehouse, level 5 energy. I love all these energetic people. I was a level 3 and I'm kind of feeling like my energy going up. Energy 3.5 is excellent. Well, why don't we go ahead and continue to keep this chat function operational. This is how we'll primarily interact throughout the course of the next 35 to 40 minutes. And I'll ask you to enter little things here. So, and as I move on, I will just, I will just let us do that. So as I said, I'm Rob Pearson, and I'm here to talk with you about professional communication. I want to start out by asking you what kind of words or ideas come to mind when you think about professional communication. That might have been what you thought this would be about when you came in. It might be words that you associate with professionalism. I want to get a sense, and this is a really useful exercise because we can all kind of see as a group what are the interesting and diverse and sometimes diverging ways that various people might perceive the notion of professional communication. So feel free to type 1 or 2 words in the chat box that come to mind when you think of professional communication, and in particular of professionalism. So we've got etiquette. So etiquette is a great term to think about. Tactful delivery, yes. I think professionalism means maybe not saying all of the emotions that you feel, particularly if they might not be read in a very positive way. Proper email language, email networking, respect. Wes, thanks for that word, respect. I think this is central to what we think about when we talk about professional communication, is always maintaining a baseline of respect. Succinct and clear. Ivory, that's like, I love that because quite often our best instincts as scholars is to complicate matters and to maybe prioritize precision over what we might call succinctness. And in professional communication, particularly over email, succinctness is really, really important. Formal language, Rachel, that's a great point. The idea of being formal versus informal is a really important distinction when we talk about professionalism. And in a sense, it maps on to professional versus unprofessional, right? Sensitive and crucial. I love all of these things. What I think this shows us is that actually our notions of professionalism, they're not very clear. It's not easy to pin down exactly what that means. And perhaps what is a better approach to this is to think about the circumstances where one might be required to engage in communication we would describe as professional versus circumstances where we might not be expected to engage in a professional way with our communication. So what I'd like us to do is think, I want you to get in the habit of thinking, does this circumstance require professionalism or does it not? And then we'll dig in a little bit more to what actually is involved in that. So I'm going to give you a few circumstances here, and I want you to just, and we'll move through these as quickly as we can. So what I'd like you to do is, I want to hear it like almost like a survey. Does the circumstance on the screen require what you would consider professional communication, or does it not require? So if you're emailing an employer about a job opening, type yes if it requires professional communication and no if it doesn't. Already I'm seeing a lot of answers yes. I think all of us agree that an email to an employer about a job opening definitely requires professional communication. What about if you're at a bar with your friend, or you're at a restaurant with a group of friends? Does it require professional communication or not? I think we all can agree that this is a no. So this is starting to help us understand when we might need to use these kinds of communication, but they're not all so clear, right? What if you're at a library asking a librarian for help finding an article, or you wouldn't be at a library right now, some of you might be, but like you're emailing a librarian about finding an article that you need for your research. Would you describe this as requiring professional communication or not? Almost all of you agree that this requires professional communication. What about if you're at a luncheon and it's an informal luncheon to which your PI invited you? So that could be your PI if you're a graduate student. It could be your boss if you're in an industry position, and you've got graduate students and postdocs there. Okay, most people are agreeing that this is a yes. One person said it depends, and it depends on what? What if the dean of your department or your school is invited? Then now everybody's saying absolutely yes. Yeah, great, Julie, thank you. And what if a potential collaborator from industry is there? So somebody that your PI or your boss might plan to be collaborating with. Absolutely. Someone even said yes with 2 S's. I like that, Sai. Thank you so much. And absolutely, yeah. So, I mean, it does depend. And I think as we narrow down into some of these examples, you'll see that it really depends on a lot of different things. So what about if you're at a presentation, at a conference, and you're talking to someone in a position similar to yours, maybe a fellow postdoc or grad student or someone from industry at a similar level to you, and you're asking them about their poster presentation? Does this require professional communication? Yeah. Lindsay, yes. And yes. Sai, yes. If you don't know them, then definitely yes. But someone says maybe no, not really. And it might actually depend on how close you are with this person. If it's someone you don't know, right? If it's during the poster session, it's really important. This is a professional environment. We try to use professional communication. But if it's after the poster session, right, you might not require the same level of professional communication. I only have a couple more, so stick with me. If you're running a lab, for example, or you're overseeing some aspect of a lab, and this could refer to undergraduates, or it could refer to graduate, it could be refer to maybe staff scientists in a lower position to you, but you're emailing everyone about lab protocols, right? A lot of you are saying, yes, this is important. And what's important here is that this is the professional environment of the laboratory, right? This is within the context of a specific kind of thing. To ask a peer to borrow their lab equipment. So this might be a peer that you're working with regularly, right? Someone that you talk to on a regular basis, but you need to ask them if you can borrow or use their assays or something like that, right? Does that require professional communication? Some people saying no, some people saying yes. It depends on how close you are, right? If it's a small lab and you work really closely with that person, it may not be important to do that, to use really professional communication. A couple more, if you're asking a long-time mentor for a letter of recommendation, I think we all will agree that this is the kind of thing that will require really professional communication. Oh yes, always yes, absolutely. I want to generalize a little bit about some of these observations because a lot of the answers seem pretty clear-cut, but there are not that many examples where everybody uniformly agreed yes or no. It requires professional communication or it doesn't. There are some generalizations we can make here. And I would argue to you that professional communication really depends upon the context. So like, what is the situation? So think about the example with discussing the research with a peer about their poster, right? In the context of the professional conference, it's important to maintain a professional behavior, but then afterwards, it's a little bit of a different context. So in a classroom, in the lab, those things might require more of a professional communication, and in a social environment, maybe less, right? It's also dependent upon the relationship of the people communicating. So just as some of you said, it depends how close I am to the peer in my lab, how I communicate with them, right? So you have to be able to consider the context and the relationship. And finally, you might even say that it depends upon the medium too. So you might argue that emails operate with a different kind of set of expectations than in person. And I would say that's true because an email is a record. Your emails will live long after you have that relationship with that person, or you leave your current position, or you move into a different job. In person, communication is a little more ephemeral, right? Once you have that conversation, it's gone, right? Virtual might offer a different way of thinking about it. Let's think about levels of professional communication on a spectrum, where some relationships might invite us to use more formal or more professional communication, and others might be less. So if it's with your family, you probably don't need to be super professional, right? If it's with friends, probably the same thing, right? If it's with peers you know really closely, if it's individuals in your personal life, if there's no kind of professional job-related environment kind of in this relationship, then it's maybe less professional. If you're talking with other scientists, certainly professional scientists, people who are more advanced or senior than you. So if you're communicating with someone who in whatever social structure or professional structure or hierarchy in your lab or whatever is more advanced or senior than you, it might be a situation where it involves more professionalism versus someone who's lower than you in the hierarchy, right? Certainly you want to be professional with your mentors if you can, and that, communication with your mentors will evolve over time as you become more close with that person, but still it's always important to default to professionalism. Acquaintances in your field. Let's look at context. Again, context also is a variable to consider here. So less professional context, social events, mundane work with peers. So if asking about borrowing lab equipment is really common, you might not feel the need to be very professional. But if it's something unusual where you typically don't have to ask people, you might require a more professional kind of form of communication. If the content is less important, so if it's super mundane, if it's not that important, like, oh, what did you have for lunch today? Maybe less important. Formal communication in the context would be like in a workshop, in a class, in a society meeting, if the content is really important. So if you're delivering news about acceptance to a program or rejection to a program, even if that's with someone you know really well, this context might urge you to use more professional communication and anything related to job or other professional opportunities. What I'm trying to drive home here is that professional communication isn't just a yes or no answer. It really depends on your ability to evaluate the relationships and the context and to make a decision there based on those factors. So let's dig into some of these because actually there's a lot of communications we do as scientists, and there's a lot of ways you could be doing this. So let's look at some specific contexts and relationships. And I want to give you some specific guidelines that I think will help. One is professional communication over email, because this is, as scientists, scientists' main form of communication, one could argue, is email. And then I'd like to talk a little bit about professional communication over Zoom. And since we don't have a lot of time, there are a lot of other things I'm going to leave out here, but I invite you to think about the principles of context and relationship and how those might inform your choice to use a professional or less professional form of communication. So let's dig into professional communication over email. Some things to consider before we dig in really is that email really is the primary way that professional scientists communicate with each other. And you might be emailing with people you don't know very well. So for better or worse, your emails are a proxy, meaning people will judge you by your emails, especially if they don't know you outside of the context of email. People will look for evidence of your personality, your character, and even the quality of your science based on how you write your emails. And so this is really important to think about because even mistakes or silly typos or anything that kind of goes wrong, if an email is misread, there's kind of a lot at stake because it can leave a poor impression that that could extend far beyond your one single interaction with that person over email. Here's another thing to consider is your emails could be saved for a long, long time. So you might look through your own inbox and see emails you've had with people from years and years ago. You probably saved all of those things, right? And emails that you compose now will reappear, I promise you, later on. And the reason for that is because as you move into your next position, as you become more advanced as a scientist, as you have publications coming out, as you move forward products in your industry projects, people will see your name in other places and say, oh, I think I remember communicating with that person. Let me check my email. And they'll type your email and they'll see those interactions, right? And so those interactions will shape. Now, past interactions will really directly shape how people experience the work that they're seeing you do in the present. So it's really important to keep this in mind because emails don't just disappear once they're done. The other thing is emails can be really easily misinterpreted, and this is famous. People misinterpret emails all the time, and it's really unfortunate, but there's not a lot we can do about it. What we can do is being professional over email means imagining what people might be misinterpreting and trying to be as clear as possible. And so I'll give you some tips on how to do that as well. So here's what I want you to think about most, is that there's a lot at stake, even when you write a very simple email, and it's quick and easy to write an email. I would suggest that you simply say, slow down on your emails. And this is a tip that I learned from a wonderful book called Research by Teresa Evans, Natalie Lunstein, and I forget the other author's name. But Teresa Evans talked about taking a Post-it and putting slow down and just putting it on your monitor so you can always remind yourself to slow down when you're composing emails for the reasons that I've said here. So let's talk a little bit about writing emails because I've already said there's a lot at stake here. You want to get it right. These are thoughts about writing professional emails. So if you have made a determination that the context and relationship really requires a thoughtful and professional email, let's talk about those circumstances. And you might pull back from some of those things as you consider. So I'll give you some examples, and I invite you to share your feedback with me in the chat about what you think about some of these examples. First is a subject line. So a subject line is that line that shows up in the inbox as people are scrolling through their emails. It's the first thing they'll see that will help them understand what the subject of the email is. They'll see that in the subject line. So Saya, I see your question and we'll get to it at the end. I'll make a note to come back. A thoughtful email subject line is really important. And this is, a lot of people don't always think about it this way. So if your email subject line is hello, right? A lot of us, actually, if I go through my emails, a lot of emails will say hello, and that's typically from people who I don't know or I don't know very well. And when I look through my many emails, I get on average about 100 to 150 emails a day, and I respond to about 70 to 80 of them. A lot of them they don't require a response, but I write a lot of emails. And when I see hello, to me, that doesn't give me any indication of what this person might be asking. I would eventually get to an email that says hello, but I wouldn't necessarily prioritize it. Another one might say meeting. And a question you might have is, as a recipient of an email that just says meeting, who do I need to be at a meeting? Did I miss a meeting? Is someone asking me for a meeting? What is this person asking, right? Is this about a meeting we already had? Some people send their emails with manuscripts that they're working on or whatever, and it could just say draft. And my question is, what is the draft of? What is this person asking me? Do I have to do any work? Did I forget to, when I get emails from students, did I forget to read the draft, or did I miss my deadline? Urgent. Okay, some people will say urgent, but then say nothing else. That's a little stressful, because then all it does is give me a general sense of urgency with no context as I'm going through my emails. Let me give you some improved subject lines, because the subject line will get the person to open your email. In fact, people, especially if you're emailing someone you don't know, they will look at the subject line to determine even whether to open it, especially if you're sending your email to a very senior person in business or in industry. A vague subject line might even mean that they just like open it really quickly and forward it to someone else to say like, decide whether or not we respond to this person, right? Most scientists have a really long list of emails in their inbox. And when they only see a list of senders and a subject line, they might prioritize responding to the things that indicate there's some action or something warm or positive that will result from them reading the email. A lot of us who get a lot of emails, and this may be true for some of you, have not so positive feelings about getting a new email. In fact, for me, when I hear the noise, it actually makes my heart skip a little beat, because I'm just like, oh, I have yet another one. So are you adding positive energy to this? If I said to you, welcome to Georgia Bio from Rob Pearson, I think that's very warm and welcoming. And I think I would look at it just to say like, oh, that's so nice. If it's about a meeting, someone might say meeting about manuscript next week. Then I know the person needs to meet with me, and I need to get my scheduling brain on. Comments from Rob Pearson on draft for science advances. This is pretty clear that I'm going to be excited to look at it, because now I know that the email contains comments about a draft. And then if, you know, rather than just say urgent, you might say what you need urgently. Feedback requested urgently, draft. So that's the subject line. I'll talk briefly about this what we call the salutation and the sign off, the thing that you start the email with and end with. And then we'll stop for questions, because you might have questions now about different circumstances or some of the things I'm sharing with you. A proper salutation and sign off are also really important components of this. So I could say, dear Rob, hi Rob, Rob, dear Dr. Pearson, dear sir or madam, to whom it may concern. I want to know kind of what you think about. Just now, tell us honestly in the chat, which of these models are you most likely to use right now? Like, what's the model you typically use? Rachel says, hi, Rob. Very nice. Hi, Rob. A lot of you are using hi, Rob. All right, I want to dig into this, because this is quite interesting. This is quite interesting. Rob with a colon, Dr. Pearson. Hi, Rob, or hi, Dr. Pearson. Tell me a little bit about hi. Not a lot of people are using dear. I know this seems like I'm splitting hairs here, but it's really, really important, because let's try to imagine what is this signaling? Someone starts with good morning, good evening, good afternoon. I think that's beautiful, very, very lovely. I actually agree with that. It acknowledges our shared existence in a time and place and season and in the world. That's great. Hello, Dr. Pearson. Dear is more for personal communication. That's really interesting. So when we think about dear, I mean, it is a kind of old-fashioned, it's not really old-fashioned, but it does have a long history, right? Yeah, very good. I think that's true. Dear, I consider it to be, I use it for every email. Dear Rob, dear Rachel, dear Archana, right? Some of you might say hi, and I think that's because it signals that it's a classic, like Kristen says. But hi maybe seems a little more personal, right? Like hi, like as if it's like you're waiting to somebody, and it's maybe more positive. So if you were delivering an email that was like, I regret to inform you that you have not been selected for our program, you might not say, hey, Rob, hi, Rob. You might want to defer to something like dear. And I think that signals to us that dear probably is a good way to go, as at least a more elevated or more professional form. Okay, going down, dear Dr. Pearson, dear sir / madam, to whom it may concern. These last two in particular, I generally avoid. And some people use it in their job letters, in their cover letters for jobs. I would avoid these things in general. If you can find a name to use, you should definitely try to use it. And if you're sending an email, you should know the person's name. Sir or madam, I generally avoid because there are actually more than just two genders, and we want to signal that, you know, it's important. With Dr. Pearson, I would say if you're emailing a scientist, it's appropriate to always use a formal title like Dr. So-and-so. And what if a person doesn't have a doctorate? Some people ask that question. I think it really doesn't matter. We want to start. The alternative would be to choose Mr. or Mrs. or Ms. or something. And again, we get into issues of gender there. I think we should just use doctor. And if the person corrects us, that's fine. The last thing we want to do is underemphasize or undervalue the work that a person has, of the work that a person has put into to their science and to potentially receiving their doctorate. To whom it may concern, I would just avoid completely. A question that's really great from Jada or Jada is, if you're having an ongoing conversation with someone, then, and you're answering back and forth, do you have to use dear or hello, Rob, at the beginning of every email? You actually don't. I think this is really important. So if you start an email communication by saying, dear Dr. Pearson, and then the person responds and signs off, look for how they sign off. If they write from or sincerely Rob, then you can write your next email and just say, dear Rob. But I would say don't do that unless the person signals to you directly. And that's because we are writing to other people, and being respectful and professional means deferring to the signals that they've sent us about what they prefer. So there are scientists who really prefer an informal way of interacting with people. And there are scientists, as you know, who are much more traditional, maybe more old-fashioned, and they want to signal to you that sense of distance between you and your position and maybe them if they're a more senior person. And the reality is we want to be mindful of that hierarchy if that's important to the person. Frankly, in my experience, I've seen people say directly, I want you to call me Rob. And when I get emails that say, dear Dr. Pearson, I'll write back and say, please call me Rob. And that's because that's my preference. But I also want people to respect that we need to defer to what's expected. Okay, signing off your emails. Great, I'm glad this is helpful, Sidika, thank you. So signing off your emails. What do you use normally? Just everyone put in what their normal sign off is. Best wishes are my examples. Carrie, great one, thanks. Thanks, thank you. Best or take care, best regards. Please let me know. Okay, we'll talk about that one in a minute. Thank you. Thank you, best. Best is kind of a defer, you know, people defer to best quite a lot. I use that a lot. Best wishes, I think is fine. Very respectfully. Oh, I see, Sidika, you work for the Army, so you do need to be a little, there are different kind of criteria here to think about. I look forward to hearing from you. We'll talk about that one in a minute too. These are great. A lot of people trash these sign-offs because they get kind of, I don't know, they get kind of repetitive, but I think, you know, the reality is we're operating in a system where there are certain norms and expectations. And so people might say, oh, I really hate getting emails that end with best wishes. You're going to see that a lot, but the reality is it's very comfortable for people. They're used to seeing it. And any deviation from what's normal and what's expected could be perceived as a kind of statement. And if you're okay with that, that's great. But if you're communicating with someone that doesn't really want to see maybe a younger or an up-and-coming scientist sort of pressing back on expected norms, which as scientists we should be doing that as much as we can. But you know, it's a performance of your view of expectations and norms that I think, you know, we need to just be mindful of. I think as the question is about if you go back and forth, is you have to say hello so and so. I think it's appropriate actually to continue to use a nice salutation each time. I really do. I want to come back to some of those things in a minute because I'm going to give you an exercise for how to imagine as if your enemy is reading your email and how it could be easily misinterpreted. We'll get to that in a minute because I'm going to give you some language you can use to think about the beginning, the middle, and end of your emails. That really, for some of you, I hope you don't think I'm splitting hairs here. This is really, it's actually really important, and I'm trying to make that case to you. So, and I'm not looking at your faces, so I can't actually tell if you're annoyed that I'm doing things that you think are pretty obvious, but I hope this is really helpful. It's important to establish a friendly tone and explain your connection to a person if you have one early on. So briefly mention the relevant context if you've met that person in the past, if you're responding to something that you saw, or some kind of connection that you have in common. So if it's a new person, you could be saying, I recently enjoyed reading your paper on X. That's a great way to start an email, especially if you actually read the paper. Probably don't use it if you haven't read the paper, but it's a great way to connect and to show someone that you respect their work and that you're familiar with the work they're doing. I hope you don't mind an email out of the blue. I use this quite often, actually, because I think it softens the tone of a random person that someone might not know reaching out to them. I hope you remember meeting me briefly at XXX, whatever it is. This jogs the person's memory. So if you have any connection with the person in the past, that's helpful, especially if it's a new person that you haven't written a lot of emails to. The biggest challenge here is to be concise about the reason for your note. So language I use, I'm writing because whatever, I'm wondering if, I'm hoping we can, but you want to make the reason or the ask or whatever it is you're emailing about as clear as possible. And if you can't fit it in the subject line, put it right at the very top of that next paragraph. People generally will skim down until they figure out what the email is asking for them. And then they might decide whether to read the whole thing. And then you end with a demonstration of gratitude and respect. So I'm looking forward to hearing from you soon. Thank you for your consideration. These sound a little bit more professional and formal. And I think if you don't know the person very well, it's always appropriate to put that. Let's go into some things that seem very neutral, but which are enemies, people that, I don't know if enemy is the right word, but try to always imagine what the least generous possible reading of even the most neutral thing you can say would be. And I'll walk you through some of these things. So if you write at the end of your email, thank you in advance. I often get emails like this, and a little part of my brain's like, oh wow, they already thanked me. Do they just like think I have to do it now? So like a really ungenerous reading might be, I expect you to meet all of my demands. So I'd avoid thank you in advance. I say thank you for your consideration, right? Thank you so much for considering doing this work, instead of thank you in advance for complying with my needs, right? At your earliest convenience I think it's very normal. We're used to that. And it's not so bad, but a really ungenerous reading might make my needs a priority. You have a lot of things going on, but as soon as you have the earliest possible convenience, I want to be at the top of your list. I'm not sure if you received my email. I get this when I don't respond right away. Someone said, I'm not sure if you received my email. Oh, I'm sure that Outlook just accidentally blocked all of your emails. No, the real reason is I have so many I didn't get to your email. So I think it's okay if you're writing a second email to follow up on someone that hasn't responded, to maybe say like, oh, I did email you a few days ago and I know you must be so busy. That's very generous, right? To say like, I know how busy you are, I respect your time. And now let me just go ahead and copy what I sent before, because I want to make sure that you have a chance to engage. Thank you for getting back to me. I get this a lot and I even use it sometimes, but the most ungenerous possible reading would be, I expected you to not get back to me. This is just some language that we're used to hearing in emails, and I'm not trying to tell you to avoid one or the other, but to consider and get into the habit of considering what an ungenerous reading of your emails might be. Let me look into some more kind of tricky situations. And I'm going to ask you to think, like, what might an ungenerous reader interpret if I were to send an email with the gist of the subject matter I'll share with you? So a good example would be like, if I'm a graduate student or a postdoc and I'm writing to like my PI, for example, and I need to express, I can't make it to the class at time because I'm working in the lab at that time. What should I do, right? Or maybe it's not your PI, maybe it's a course you have to take or something. I can't make it at that time because I'm working in the lab. What should I do? You genuinely need this information. You need to express to the person that you have a conflict in the time, and you need them to essentially acquiesce or give you some action that you can take to make sure that it's right. But what are some of the potential misreadings that could emerge from a request like this? And how might you construct an email that that's very clear and cuts off those potential misreadings at the pass, so to speak? So if the real issue is you can't make it at the class because you're working at the lab, and I want you to write here. I'll read your responses over the chat. But let me think to you about what I'm concerned about if I'm writing this email. What if the person reading it interprets that you have just simply prioritized something else? Yes, exactly. You prioritize lab work over the class, and it may be that you do prioritize the lab work over the class. But is that something you want to signal to another colleague or to a professor? The professor, yeah, Kamira says the professor will think lab's taking priority over their specific class, as opposed to genuinely wanting a solution. I think that's absolutely correct. Yeah. It comes off as a little immature, possibly, yeah, one could say. The question at the end, what should I do? It signals, as Rachel said, your class is not a priority. Suggestion is, I'm sorry, I'll be unable to attend your class today. I was unable to reschedule a time-sensitive task in the lab. I actually think that's really brilliant, because it says, like, it indicates that you tried to do something, you tried to reschedule it, or it's something that you wanted to do. Even if you didn't, saying you're unable to do it indicates that you at least have considered that as an option. It's respectful of the reality that you respect the other person's time. This is really great. Y'all are just putting in some great ideas here. So an email might actually address some of those things and say, like, oh, the class is really important and I'm so disappointed I have to miss it. Yeah. Unfortunately, there was something I tried to reschedule, but I couldn't. Do you have any, instead of saying, what should I do? Which, like, demands an answer, as if it's like that person's responsibility to help you figure out your life, right? Instead, you might say, do you have any suggestions for how I might make up what I'm gonna miss? Or instead of even framing it as about the assignment that you might miss, reframing it as, do you have any ideas for how I might be able to get the information so I have a good experience, or something like that. Yeah. Another example, if you have to write to your PI and say, I was invited to present at a research conference, so I will not be able to run experiments on these days. What might a PI who's, maybe reading quickly, or maybe ungenerous, or maybe has a low, who knows, what is the potential danger of a misreading from this request? And how might we anticipate those things and build them into our email, right? So if you have to be gone, you want to make sure that the PI understands that running your experiments and doing your responsibility is a real priority, right? You don't want anyone to think that what you're doing for them is not a priority. You might want to frame it as asking for permission to go. You might, if that's appropriate, if it's something that's directly tied to your career interests, you might express, I know I have these 2 things I have to do. Can you help me prioritize? Can you help me make a decision on how to do both things at once, right? They could think you're not prioritizing, right? And especially if you're in a research lab where it's, especially if you need to send a signal to the PI that the work is really important to you, you want to make sure you're saying that explicitly, and you can say it explicitly. And then here's another, I have a great, yeah. So a suggestion is, I have a great opportunity to present the great research the lab is doing at a conference. I will still run the experiments, but over the weekend. I like that. The only thing that concerns me at the end is just sort of telling the person, like, this is what I'm doing. And it may be that that's appropriate in the culture of your lab, but in some labs, this is not true for everyone. So weigh this against your own environment, right? Or your own context. But is it appropriate for you to just push things around like that to be able to make the time, right? And you may need to do that. Very good. Everybody, you guys this is just great. A couple of other tips. Do your best to ensure you're emailing the right person. If you are emailing a new person in particular, ask a member of your network for an introduction. Keep it short, clear, and succinct. Introduce yourself and explain why you're writing. Ask for only one action item. I'll tell you a brief story, because I want to get to some other things here, and I'll save 10 minutes for questions, okay? Include your, ask for only one action item. Include your contact information in the signature. Make sure you proofread. It's okay to follow up once per week, but probably no more than 3 times if you're writing to a new person. Rachel asks, where can you find information for the hiring manager if you need to write to them directly? That's one of the big challenges of preparing for the job market. And you want to put in a genuine good faith effort to find information about that. It's not always going to be clear. Some job postings might actually mention the department or the hiring manager by name. And if that's the case, see if the company has a website with a directory where you can look up the department and see who's associated with it. You can also look on LinkedIn and see if you can find that department and the location, and see if you can zero down to at least a couple of people. There are other tricky ways if you're really reaching out without any kind of knowledge. You could look, some people recommend looking at sleuthing through how companies use their email addresses, looking at the US Patent Office to see if there are patents with people's emails and names and roles and responsibilities. It's pretty tricky. So this is just my general things. The story I wanted to tell with you briefly was about when I was applying for a job a few years ago, and I wrote an email to the hiring manager who I found through the website sleuthing. I wrote an email to the person, essentially introducing myself and expressing my interest in the position. But at that time, I broke every rule possible. And I know this because I eventually did get the job, and I asked the hiring manager, who became my friend, what did I do wrong in my email to you? And there I learned a lot of things not to do. And this list here is essentially my warnings about sending emails. Only ask for one person, or the person might get really frustrated or annoyed. Including your contact information, meaning the person can easily see where you're coming from, and even your email address, which may not, which is helpful to have there. Only ask for one thing. So in my email to this person, I sent like 3 or 5 a bunch of questions about like, what's it like working in your office? Do you think my experience would be appropriate? Do you think I should? And the person later told me, they're like, I can't even answer all those questions, and I'm not going to even go there because this is too much. Plus, if the person's in a hiring manager role, they could feel like you're verging too close on that relationship being one of an applicant with the hiring manager, which is highly prescribed, and the hiring manager has to be really respectful of the internal processes and policies involved in that relationship. Yeah. Question about, if you don't get a response to your email, can you wait for a week or 2 and resend the message with small changes on LinkedIn? Yeah, I think that's appropriate, actually. I do. Good idea. So this is my section about talking about professional communication over email. This says professional communication with your mentor, but actually I want to talk about professional communication over Zoom in our last few minutes together. I don't have a lot here, but I want to make sure I get through this because a lot of people have questions about how the virtual media we're using now to interact professionally is impacting what it means to be a professional and to use professional communication. So a lot of this has to do, in fact, with the visuality of how you present on screen, and like where the camera sits and how you do that. So let me share with you a couple of observations, and then we'll have time for questions. The challenges here with Zoom is that you can't use your full range of body and expression. So you're only seeing a limited space for me, a limited window. You can't necessarily see or hear the response from the viewers very well, and there might be technical glitches. People might drop in and out of the audio, and that's a real challenge. Technical challenges with audio and visual components. I'm sure there are others. So what I'll give you is some suggestions for giving thought to the position and spacing of your face and body. So a lot of these ideas actually come from my colleague at Emory, Peggy Wagner, who delivers a wonderful presentation on online communication, and some of these ideas come from what she's shared. I think you have to give a sense of what you look like on the screen. So I would say this is a little too close. You can see my facial flaws. But more importantly, I look like I'm just a head floating on the screen. You might want to avoid backlit environments. A lot of people will have their laptop and they'll put it on their lap and look down. And unfortunately, this is what we look like with a bad angle. It doesn't send a good message, but this is just right. So giving you enough so that if you use gestures, which you might use professionally to emphasize a point, that they're visible, that there's a sort of intentional background behind you. These are some thoughts I have. Aiming for an eye level, horizontal, and balance in relation to the camera. So you should be seeing. That's what I'm trying to do with you here. Avoid putting your laptop on your lap, providing space for gestures, tidy up your backdrop. In fact, just before this, I ran back to this chair behind me and I moved a box and some tissue paper because I got a shipment in from Amazon. Actually, it was from, well, I won't say, but, and then moving the image, move the image of the speaker. Oh, close to the camera on your laptop. So if you're looking at someone on screen, and on the screen, the image, the video feed from that person is down here, you'll be talking to them, thinking you're looking directly at them, but they'll perceive that you're looking away, right? So let's just quickly think about some positive and negative associations with nonverbal communication, especially in the US, that actually are compounded over Zoom. So we think of, this is just to, these are US associations. It may be different in other communities and cultures, but speaking about, what we do in the US, we have positive associations with direct eye contact. So if I were to say to you, thank you for joining our webinar today, and I'm looking right at the camera, hope that gives you, a sense that I respect you and I'm being intentional. And also it's very familiar because this is how people on the news look at the camera and whatnot. Whereas if I kind of look away, if I am here typing notes and the video feed is down in the corner of my monitor, or I'm looking at a second computer, it looks like I'm not even talking to you, right? Nodding up and down, we think of as positive and professional and indicating interest. A thoughtful, focused expression while others are talking, a smiling, pleasant demeanor, looking away, crossing your arms, we don't do this, shrugging your shoulders. This kind of thing can send negative associations to the viewer, swaying around in the camera frame, something to avoid. And it's actually something you should test out on your Zoom in case your even small motions can actually take up wide angles on the frame. And if someone's projecting it onto a large screen, say for like a Zoom interview, a small movement like this actually on a large screen looks like a giant person moving large distances up on the screen. So it's important to try to stay balanced and composed. Other thoughts to add, think about using a Zoom background if you want to maintain privacy over the physical space that you're in and professionalism. So if you're speaking on behalf of an organization, you can put up their backdrop. If you're going to record anything, you want to ask for permission before recording anything. And that's permission from the speakers, but also permission from the members of the group as well. If you have more than one person in a meeting, you may wish to set rules of engagement, just like I did here, to say most of our interactions are going to be over the chat. Or I've seen other meetings where someone will say, if you need to speak up or you feel like you need to say something, make sure you raise your hand and I will unmute you. It could be any number of things, but that kind of structure really helps these meetings go well and leave a positive and professional impression on people that you're talking with. Okay, a really great question from Siddiqa about whether to turn on or off your video feed. This is it's a really tough question. I think, let me go through this because this will help actually. If you pause periodically to say, does anyone have anything to add? If you feel someone hasn't had a chance to say something, always inviting them in a nice way and to say like, just wanted to make sure that you felt like you said everything that you need to say. It can be very inclusive. So this is kind of speaks to Siddiqa's question. Many of us are living in environments and working in environments where the reality is we're doing a lot of things at one time. It may be that you're you're working from home and you have family obligations that are kind of in the physical space. In general, I found most people to be very understanding of that and expecting it. And it can be helpful at the beginning of the meeting to just explain pieces of that context, particularly if you think it might impact the impression that you have. So in my case, I didn't do this today, but in my case, I might say, just so you know, I have some dogs that are moving in and out of the space and you might hear the sound. Or if it's a really important meeting, I might say I live close to a train tracks and periodically the train goes by. That way the person can just come to expect those things. As far as the video on and off, I think you can be really, if it's a small meeting, it's weird to have the meeting off, but I mean the visual off, but I think you can actually, it's very professional, I think, to address this directly with the person at the beginning of a meeting and say, or even when you're setting up a meeting. So I do this sometimes. I'll say to people, I recognize that not everybody wants to have their video on, and I'm open to meeting with you with the video on or off. It's totally up to you, but I want you to feel like you're at your most comfortable. Saying something like that is so inviting and welcoming to another person. And then they can be very explicit with you and say, oh, I generally have my video on, that's fine for me. And then there's no question there and no awkwardness at the beginning of a meeting. If it's a meeting like this with a lot of people, I don't think most people would notice if your video is on or off. And so I don't think it's as important there. And explain if you're taking notes on your keyboard. So the reason I would say this is just because sometimes it signals that if we're typing a lot and the person hears the typing or hears the mouse clicking or sees you looking around the screen, it could signal to that person you're not fully 100% present. And so if you even start to say like, oh, just so you know, I'm actually taking notes here on this other laptop. So if it looks like I'm looking over here, it's just because I'm taking notes. That can help people. It can help, again, respectfully and professionally kind of set expectations for the behavior that they'll observe on screen. So I have about 8 minutes now for questions. I think I did a pretty good job staying on task. And you all, I think I addressed some questions as they came through. But we spent some time today talking about best practices for being professional over email. I'm hoping that some of these things were new to you, or that in particular, I helped you think intentionally about how to avoid potential misreadings in your email communication, because as I said, there's a lot at stake in our emails, and also how to be intentional about signaling professionalism over Zoom when we're now all used to being sitting in the same chair, acting crazy with our friends, and also having job interviews, and also talking with our boss, and it's just a little bit hard. So we have about 8 minutes for questions if anyone has some questions. And I think at this point, I'm going to close my thing here. And I'm going to invite any of you. I think at this point we can unmute. In fact, let's set some rules of engagement. If you'd like to ask a question orally, I invite you to raise your hand, and you can do that by going to the participants list, I believe. And then under your name, you will not do that at the very, oh yeah, at the very bottom of the participants list, there should be a little button that says raise hand, which is what I've just done, and the little blue hand will show up. So we have a question. Great, it's working. We have a question from Justin, and can we go ahead and unmute Justin, please? Or Justin, can you unmute yourself?
Yes, can you hear me all right?
Perfect.
All right. I was just wondering, I see that you have the pronouns listed there next to your name. Do you recommend that we do that as well?
I do that. I do that because I want to be. I want to recognize that people use all different pronouns and have different preferences. You know, I think it's important to do that, and so I do it in any kind of meeting, and I do that because that's my personal values and it's important to me. I think I noticed that I'm one of the only people that have done it on this list, and that's totally fine. But I do think it's a matter of your personal values. It signals respect for people if they're, and particularly in a group like this where there's a lot of folks, people might use different gender pronouns, and so I want to be mindful and create a space that allows for that and normalizes it. I think it also has to do with your comfort level and things like that. So so I have never found it to be, I think at least in the environments where I live and work, it's totally acceptable, and people are grateful for it.
Thank you. That answers my question.
Great. Great, thanks. Thank you. Did I mispronounce your name? I'm sorry if I did, Justice.
That's all right. Justice Prakash.
How about, can we hear from Lindsay Ramirez, please?
Hi. So I had a question. You said to avoid dear sir or madam or to whom it may concern, but sometimes you're emailing people like IT or support, and that's just, it doesn't say a name or anything. How would you address them in your salutation?
I find, I think this is frustrating and hard too. So yeah. I write to them and I say, dear IT department. Okay. I know that's not so personalized. I don't think there's a lot at stake when we're doing those, but I do think it signals respect, and I think that they value it. I really wish there were a name, and when the person writes back to me, I always write dear so-and-so in there once I have that information. But yeah, that's a great question. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Can we hear from Jada or Jada, please?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, perfect. I can hear you.
Okay. So I was questioning, so my company, we use a combination of email and Microsoft Teams. So like we'll communicate a lot within chat. I guess I was wondering like your kind of opinion on that. Like I feel like the email is usually more formal like speak, but in chat when people just kind of want like a quick answer or something, I kind of see that people don't use the salutation or the closing. Like, is that okay? Like, people are still being, no typos and things like that. But is it okay to be a little bit less formal in a chat setting?
I think absolutely. Yeah, the chat lends itself to that. And part of that, again, is the medium you're using, right? So coming off of email and then onto a chat, I mean, it just invites a different mode of professionalism. So again, yeah, like you said, no typos, no issues. And also there's another layer that kind of gets deep into the level of informality, which is the text message, right?
Right.
So as you go from email then into Teams chat, you don't need to have a salutation or a sign off. You just say like, oh, hi, so-and-so. And one way to signal that actually is if you want to still maintain that professionalism is to say, dear or hi, Rob, comma, and then jump directly into the email without the like double return that you would see in an email. That keeps that language there that's professional, but it allows you to just kind of go through the, like, it seems a little informal. It's weird how the small punctuation could make such a big difference, but yeah. Great, that's an awesome question. And then in text, once you start to, so I don't ever gossip or say anything negative over email, period. I slightly do a little bit of gossip over the chat, but I try to avoid it. And then when I get really gossip, then I go into the text message. Not that you should ever gossip, but yeah.
All right, thank you.
You're very welcome. A question also from Brian.
Hi, thanks for the talk today. Question kind of regarding a cold email with an ask. So for instance, I'm in a class right now where I need to interview entrepreneurs. So would you recommend reaching out, just saying like introducing yourself, waiting for a response, and then going for like the ask? Or is it better just to do it all right up front? And this can be applied to a lot of different requests or asks from other people, not just this instance.
The cold email is an art form, and especially if you're talking about advanced scientists here, and I think this is a really important context. So you're not a salesperson. You might be a salesperson, but many of us, okay, you're not particular. If you're doing a sales pitch, it's a different set of rules. But we're talking about advanced scientists talking about advancing their careers, and so I think there's a level of expectation that people will be respectful and responsible and responsive to one another at that level that I don't think is present with complete strangers. That being said, you do need to signal that you're part of the same community with that person. Otherwise, they won't really understand it. So if you describe your graduate program or your company or something, and this is our relationship with you and your company in the past, like that at least establishes that connection. But the cold email is, so the ask itself, yeah, there's a method that you kind of front load your emails and you put everything that you need right up at front as top as possible and let the person decide if they want to go on. And I think that's an appropriate method. If you're asking for information about career paths or something, then I think actually it's really important to keep that ask really minimal. So if I wouldn't ask all of the questions you would want to know about a career path in the email. That signals to people that you think they don't have better things to do than type long email responses back. When even if you might just be really asking for a few minutes of that person's time, asking all those questions in advance, it signals to the person that a lot of work is involved when really you're asking only for a 15-minute conversation. So I would say, like, do you have time for a 15-minute interview with me? I'd like to ask you some questions. I can tell you more about what I'd like to know later. But to keep that initial outreach as small as possible. It's about creating warm feelings for people. And since I said a lot of people have negative feelings around emails, unfortunately, we have to mitigate that with trying to be almost exaggerated and not upbeat and positive tone.
Awesome, thank you.
You're very welcome. We hit the 1 o'clock hour and I want to be mindful of time. So I'm going to go ahead and stop here and pass it back to our leaders today. So please take it away.
Thanks, Rob. Thank you very, very much for your time. And everyone else, thank you for attending. I'll be sending a follow-up email just describing the deliverable that we're asking for in more detail. And then just one other note, and I'll also put this reminder in the email as well, but I'm purposely not hiding your emails whenever I'm sending these follow-up emails. And that's so that you guys can get connected with each other. I mean, use this and leverage your network. So feel free to reach out to each other, have conversations. You guys can talk about the deliverables. So however you want to leverage that, but I'll send an email now and let me know if you have any questions. So thanks again, Rob.
You're very welcome.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Alexa.
Thanks.